I'd like to offer, as a US citizen, some advice to the officials that currently represent me and several million Americans. If you slap a 50% tariff on India, India is going to look elsewhere for trade partners. So this pretense of not understanding why India would be at this meeting or why Modi, who doesn't always go, would be there, for me, that's what doesn't make sense. We know why. We know that the United States is unilaterally reshaping what was a multilateral trade organization, a multilateral trade relationship in the world. The only country that can benefit from that is China, ultimately. And let me put it like this. The only people that were liberated on so-called Liberation Day were adversaries of the United States.
As we're looking at these images from yesterday and that little huddle that I was referring to, what was the biggest takeaway from what we have seen so far take place in China?
I think for my money, if the Chinese, the Russians, and the Indians get together in any form of alliance that is economic and around the edges military, there's no way that the Americans can compete in the 21st century. We might as well go home. The entire theme of American history in terms of diplomacy has been to avoid the combination of foreign great powers such that we would not be able to confront them economically or militarily. That is why we got involved in the two world wars. That is why we were cautious in Vietnam. And I'm afraid to say that if there's one takeaway from this, it's that China could not have dreamt of a better moment, both in terms of the visual and in terms of US trade policy.
And what about this suggestion of empowering the global South, this cooperation now with this region? How does the United States fend that off, or what is it going to do in response?
So this is really difficult because on the one hand, you want the global South to be as rich as possible. And there's no way that a consumer-based society that believes in liberty like the United States could tell the global South not to develop, although sometimes you do see that in the climate space. On the other hand, of course, if the global South is finally deciding that instead of non-aligned, as it was the case in the Cold War, instead of non-aligned, the global South is going with the new leadership in Beijing and this Russo-Chinese axis, that, of course, is a huge problem for the United States, if for no other reason than the economies of scale. So the United States is going to have to change its economic model. No longer can we export fiat currency and security services in exchange for the import of effectively cheap goods. That's not going to work anymore. And I suppose what we really have to think about as analysts of the global stage, as you point out, is why is the United States doing this in such a haphazard way? And why is China and why is Russia doing it effectively so well?
We are looking at the images of Vladimir Putin and just, of course, alongside that of Narendra Modi. These two countries, because of the sanctions on the Russian oil, India is slapped with 50% for buying the Russian oil. But that has not stopped them in terms of this dynamic that we're seeing. They shared a ride together in Vladimir Putin's car to travel to their own bilateral meeting. What are you seeing? What are you thinking about how this bilateral relationship is developing?
Well, the bilateral relationship between China and the United States is one thing, and that's always been somewhat adversarial. The bilateral relationship between Russia and China has always been worse. I'll give you one example. During the Cold War, the Russians, the Soviets then, withheld nuclear technology from the Chinese for a very long time, and the Chinese have never forgotten that. So there is an underlying adversarial relationship between Russia and China that, for my money, is a bigger beef, to use colloquial language, than the United States and China so far in history. But it does seem that Russia and China are finding a way around that, probably because Russia is the weaker partner and has no choice. I've heard Russia described as an energy vassal for the Chinese. That's not a million miles away from the mark. What we really have to think about, though, is if there's a reverse Kissinger on the table for the United States in the 21st century, is it possible to split the Russians and Chinese apart again, maybe over Siberia, maybe over their relationship with India? I don't know. I don't know whether we can, but that is the sorts of thing that we should be thinking about.
What is China's role in ending the war in Ukraine?
Nothing. China wants the war in Ukraine to continue. It doesn't want it to get out of hand, but it's more important to China that this war is something that continues on its bloody path. I think, in essence, the Chinese probably look at this as a strategic opportunity, as a very broadly speaking European civil war in which the United States has depleted its munitions, the Russians have depleted their manpower, and ultimately a weaker Russia and a weaker United States will result. So I'm afraid to say nothing.
Okay, well, what about China and the leader of North Korea? This is Kim Jong-un, making a very special trip to the country. He's going to be taking part in the military parade and watching that, which will take place tomorrow. What do you make of this visual?
I think that the fact that the North Korean leader is being treated with such reverence and respect is another part of the signal to the West, because the North Koreans themselves don't have a perfect relationship with the Chinese, but it should be understood that if there's ever a nuclear attack or a cyber attack on the United States, it will probably come from North Korea. So the North Koreans are indeed useful to the Chinese and the Russians in this new alliance. But look, I mean, North Korea is a sovereign state, China is a sovereign state. If they want to proceed with this sort of diplomacy, that's their prerogative. It's just a shame, if we pull this back to the United States and the global ecosystem, it's a shame that we seem to be completely absent, other than for some complaints on television from people like Navarro.
Would it be a first for, the leaders of so many of these countries, call it North Korea, Russia, India, China, Iran, to be all on the same continent, all in the same city at the same time?
Well, world history will be decided effectively by whether or not China and Russia can maintain this alliance long enough to bring those parties together permanently, that you just mentioned. An access of Russia, China, Iran, and India would be unbeatable. That's something that the West, that the Americans, that the British, the Europeans have to think about. And it seems to me that whether or not this is the first time they're ever in a room together, it does seem like it is the hard launch of Chinese soft power, and that in and of itself is novel.